Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we're going to dive into a gripping story of love, loyalty, and survival as we uncover whether Jack and Tu Tien can overcome the company's financial collapse after serious bridge construction violations left them unable to even pay the bank interest. Will love be enough to carry them through their darkest chapter? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. By the time Jack's company completed the major project with one of the biggest corporations in the region, people in the construction industry had started looking at him in a completely different way. Not long ago, his name had been tied to scandal, investigation, and the collapse that nearly destroyed everything he had built. There had been a time when people spoke about his company with doubt, hesitation, and quiet caution. Some thought he would never recover. Some believed the company would disappear completely. Others were sure that even if he survived, he would never rise high enough again to earn serious trust in the industry. But life had turned in a way few people expected. The truth about the bridge collapse had come out. Jack had been fully cleared. The people who truly knew his character, his standards, and his way of working began to stand behind him again. Little by little, his company returned to stable ground. Then it moved beyond stability. The contracts grew bigger. The clients became more serious. The projects that once felt out of reach slowly began landing on his desk. And then came the project that changed everything. It was the kind of contract most companies spent years chasing. A large-scale development tied to a major corporation, high in value, high in visibility, and high in visibility. It required technical precision, discipline management, and a reputation strong enough to survive intense scrutiny at every step. When Jack first signed the agreement, even he understood what it meant. If they completed it well, the company would not just recover, it would rise. So he gave it everything. For months, Jack threw himself into the project with a level of focus that reminded everyone why he had once been respected so deeply in the first place. But this time, he was not working out of desperation. He was working with clarity. He had already learned what it cost to trust blindly, what it cost to carry everything alone, and what it meant to almost lose the people who mattered most. That changed the way he led. He checked details personally, but he no longer tried to be a machine. He built stronger internal systems. He tightened approvals. He demanded technical transparency at every level. He listened more carefully, delegated more wisely, and refused to let even the smallest corner cutting pass unnoticed. The people around him could feel the difference. He was still firm, still exacting, still the kind of leader who made people stand straighter when he walked onto a site. But now there was a steadiness in him that had not existed before. He had rebuilt not just the company, but himself. When the project was finally completed and accepted without issue, the effect was immediate. Industry news spread quickly. The corporation praised the quality, the pace, and the professionalism of Jack's company. Other partners took notice. New invitations came in. Meetings that once would have been difficult to secure now appeared one after another. Bigger firms wanted to sit at the same table with him. Investors who had once stayed distant now wanted to talk. Within a short time, Jack's company was no longer seen as a company that had survived hardship. It was seen as one of the rising names in the construction field. At the office, the atmosphere changed completely. People moved with confidence. The younger staff looked at Jack with admiration that felt almost personal. Senior employees who had stayed through the darkest period now carried a quiet pride. Even the office itself felt different. The phones rang with opportunity now, not fear. The meetings were about growth, not survival. The files on Jack's desk were no longer reminders of debt and legal pressure. They were blueprints, proposals, partnership offers, expansion plans. And through all of it, every time Jack had a quiet moment, his thoughts still returned to the same place, home, to Tu Tien, to their little boy. No matter how large the contracts became, no matter how much respect returned to his name, nothing felt more important than the life waiting for him when he stepped back through his own door. That was where the real victory lived. One evening after another long but successful day, Jack came home later than usual, carrying a rolled set of plans tucked under one arm. Tu Tien was sitting on the floor near their son, who was happily reaching for a wooden toy and making soft little sounds to himself. The sight of them stopped Jack for a moment, the way it always did. No matter what kind of meeting he had just left, no matter how much money was written in a contract, this was the image that softened him most quickly. Tu Tien looked up first and smiled. "You're late," she said, though there was no real complaint in her voice. Jack smiled back. "I know." Their son looked up at the sound of his father's voice, blinked once, and then immediately reached both little hands toward him. Jack laughed under his breath, crouched down, and lifted the boy into his arms with the ease of someone who had long since stopped pretending he was not completely in love with being a father. "Well," he said softly to the child, "at least someone still looks happy to see me." Tu Tien gave him a look. "Only someone?" Jack grinned, then kissed the baby's cheek and sat down beside her. She noticed the rolled papers in his hand almost immediately. "What's that?" Jack looked at the plans, then at her face, and for a second there was something almost boyish in his expression. Excitement. Anticipation. A happiness he was trying not to reveal too quickly. "I want to show you something," he said. Tu Tien raised an eyebrow slightly. "That sounds dangerous." Jack laughed and unrolled the plans carefully across the low table. At first, Tu Tien just looked at the lines and shapes without understanding. Then, little by little, the layout began to make sense. Rooms, walls, windows, garden space, a larger kitchen, a brighter sitting area, a front yard, a child's room. She slowly turned to look at him. "Jack," he leaned one arm on the table and watched her quietly. "It's a house design," he said. "A new one." Tu Tien stared at him. "A new house?" Jack nodded. "A real home. Spacious, solid, bright, somewhere safer, more comfortable, and better for you and our son." For a moment, she could not answer. She looked back down at the plans, then again at him, then once more at the careful lines showing a place clearly designed not only with money, but with thought. The house was not extravagant in a flashy way. It was beautiful in the way a dream becomes practical when someone truly intends to build it. There was space for their son to grow, space for their son to grow, space for bite, space for peace. A proper room for his mother, a wide kitchen Tu Tien would love, a courtyard open enough for evening air and quiet family meals. "You've been planning this?" she asked softly. Jack nodded. "For a while." "Since when?" "Since the company started stabilizing for real." Tu Tien looked at him more carefully now. "And you didn't tell me?" Jack smiled faintly. "I wanted to be sure first. I didn't want to bring you a dream that was still too fragile." That answer struck her deeply, because it was exactly the kind of thing Jack would do. He had become even more careful with Hope after everything they had survived. He no longer spoke too quickly about good things. He built them quietly, steadily, until they were strong enough to stand. Tu Tien lowered her eyes to the plans again. An emotion rose in her chest so suddenly that she had to take a slow breath before speaking. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jack watched her face. "You really think so?" She let out a soft laugh through gathering tears. "You made a room just for the baby to grow into. I made a room for every version of our future I could think of." That almost undid her completely. Their son, still in Jack's lap, reached down and slapped one tiny hand against the paper, ruining the seriousness of the moment instantly. Both of them laughed. Jack looked down at him. "You approve too?" The baby made a happy sound. Tu Tien wiped at the corner of one eye and shook her head with a smile. "Well, there's your final decision." Jack rolled the plans just slightly so the child would not crush them entirely. They looked back at Tu Tien. "This is only the first part," he said. That made her blink. "Only the first part?" Jack hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of what he was about to say. Then he placed the baby carefully into Tu Tien's arms, straightened a little, and looked at her in a way that made her heart begin beating faster before he had even spoken. "There's something else I've been planning," he said. Tu Tien held his gaze. Jack took a breath. "After the house begins, when everything is in the right place, I want to hold a real wedding." The room went quiet. Not the cold kind of silence. The full kind. The kind where emotion arrives too suddenly for words to keep pace. Tu Tien just looked at him. Jack's voice softened as he continued. "Not a rush promise. Not a dream postponed forever. A real wedding. A proper one. With respect. With joy. With our son there. With you standing beside me, not as the woman who suffered through everything with me, but as the woman I want to spend the rest of my life honoring." By the time he finished speaking, tears had already slipped down Tu Tien's cheeks. Not because she was sad, because some dreams hurt when they finally become possible, after being buried for too long. She looked out at the baby in her arms, then back at Jack, and her voice came out softer than she intended. "You've really been thinking this far ahead?" Jack smiled gently. "Every day." Tu Tien let out a trembling laugh. "And here I thought you were only pretending to work late all those nights." "I was working late," he said, "just not only for contracts." She shook her head, overwhelmed, smiling through tears. Then, in the quiet warmth of that small room, with their son between them and the future slowly opening in front of them, only one question remained in the air between hope and memory. Now that Jack and Tu Tien finally had the chance to build the life they once thought they had lost, would they truly be able to live that happiness fully? Or was life still hiding one more test behind the dream? For a long moment after Jack spoke, Tu Tien could not say anything. A new house, a real wedding, a future that was no longer being imagined in whispers, but planned with intention. She had lived through too many broken days to accept happiness too quickly. So when Jack sat there looking at her with steady eyes and a heart that was finally brave enough to dream out loud again, Tu Tien felt joy and fear rise together inside her. Not fear because she doubted him, never that. Fear because life had taught her that the more precious something was, the more carefully it had to be held. Their little boy shifted in her arms and made a soft sound, as if reminding both of them that this life they had built was already real. Jack reached over and gently touched the baby's tiny hand, then looked back at Tu Tien. "Well?" he asked softly. "You're making me nervous." That finally pulled a laugh out of her. "You," she said. "Nervous?" Jack nodded with complete seriousness. "Very." Tu Tien shook her head, tears still shining in her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you don't hate the idea." This time she laughed properly, and the baby blinked in surprise at the sound. "I could never hate that idea," she said. Jack's whole expression softened. Then Tu Tien looked down at the plans again, at the baby in her arms, and finally back at him. "I'm just trying to believe this is really our life now." Jack was quiet for a second before answering. "It is," he said. "Maybe not perfect, maybe not guaranteed forever, but it's ours." That sentence stayed with her. Because after everything they had survived, ownership mattered in a deeper way now. Their happiness had not been handed to them. It had been fought for, cried for, nearly lost, and somehow held on to. So yes, this life was theirs, even if it still felt fragile sometimes. Over the following weeks, Jack's plan slowly became action. The house project moved from sketches to meetings, from ideas to materials, from dreams to schedules. But because this was Jack, and because life had humbled him deeply, he did not approach it like a man trying to show off success. He approached it like someone building shelter for the people he loved most. He chose carefully. The foundation had to be strong. The design had to be practical, warm, and full of light. The rooms had to feel peaceful, not grand for the sake of appearance. He wanted a house where Tu Tien could breathe easily, where their son could run safely, where every corner felt earned rather than displayed. And every evening he would come home and update her on the progress. Sometimes he brought new drawings, sometimes material samples. Sometimes he described changes with such detail that Tu Tien would tease him and say he sounded more excited about the kitchen windows than any man should. Jack never denied it. "I've learned," he told her one night, "that happiness is usually built from details." Tu Tien smiled at that and tucked a blanket more carefully around their sleeping son. "Then I suppose we're finally rich in the right things." Tool. At the same time, the wedding plans quietly began to grow. Not because Jack wanted something extravagant, not because Tu Tien cared about a display, but because to him this mattered deeply. They had already become a family in every way that counted. They had suffered together, stayed together, and carried each other through pain. Most couples never had to imagine, but Jack wanted to stand beside her in peace, not crisis. He wanted to look at her in a day filled with blessing instead of fear. He wanted the world, and more importantly, their own hearts, to witness a promise made not under pressure, but under joy. So he began planning carefully. A guest list, small but meaningful, a simple but beautiful ceremony, fresh flowers, warm lights, familiar faces, and room enough for laughter. He wanted their son there, of course. That part was never even a question. When he told Tu Tien some of these details, she would often become quiet, not because she disliked them, but because the tenderness of it all overwhelmed her. Sometimes she still caught herself looking at Jack and wondering how the same man who had once sat behind questioning tables and prison walls was now discussing wedding cloth, house flooring, and baby shoes with such calm seriousness. Life really could turn in impossible ways. But with every hopeful plan came one silent shadow. The more beautiful the future began to look, the more both of them sometimes found themselves wondering whether life would truly let them keep it. It showed up in small ways. If Jack came home later than usual, Tu Tien's heart tightened before she could stop it. If the baby developed a fever for even a few hours, Jack stayed awake all night, unable to rest until it passed. If a phone call came at the wrong time, both of them looked up a little too quickly. Not because they were unhappy, but because joy, after suffering, always carries memory inside it. One evening, after they had put the baby to sleep and the house had gone quiet, Tu Tien found Jack sitting alone with the houseplants spread across the table again. He was not working exactly, just looking at them in silence. She walked over and sat beside him. "You do that a lot," she said softly. "Do what?" "Look at the future like you're afraid it might disappear if you blink." Jack glanced at her, then gave a small smile that did not fully hide the truth. "Am I that obvious?" "To me, yes." He leaned back slightly in his chair and exhaled. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jack said quietly, "Sometimes I still don't trust peace." Tu Tien's expression softened immediately. Jack kept his eyes on the plans. "I trust you. I trust our son. I trust what I feel when I'm with you both. But peace itself," he shook his head once. "I think part of me is still waiting for someone to tell me it won't last." That honesty hurt her because she understood it completely. She reached for his hand and held it. "I feel that too sometimes," she admitted. "When the baby sleeps too long, I check on him. When you're late, my mind goes somewhere dark before I can stop it. I hate that I still do that." Jack turned his hand and laced his fingers with hers. "Maybe we always will, at least a little. Then what do we do?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. And this time there was steadiness in him rather than fear. "We live anyway," he said. "We build anyway. We love each other anyway. We don't let old pain decide everything that comes next." That stayed with Tu Tien long after the conversation ended. And in the days that followed, she noticed him trying to live exactly that way. He laughed more easily with their son. He spoke more openly about the wedding. He stopped treating every good thing like something fragile and started treating it like something worth trusting. Even the people around him could see it. Jack's mother, who had watched her son walk through darkness she once thought would break him, now saw something in him she had prayed for, quietly, for years. Peace with roots. Not temporary relief, not distracted happiness, real grounded peace. One afternoon, while holding her grandson in the yard, she said to Tu Tien, "He looks like a man who finally found where his heart belongs." Tu Tien looked toward the doorway where Jack was standing with rolled construction plans in one hand and a bottle for the baby in the other, somehow managing both with serious concentration. Then she smiled. "He did," she said. And still, life moved forward. The house foundation was laid. The wedding date began to feel real. The baby grew stronger, louder, and more expressive by the day. The company continued rising, and Jack's name in the industry became stronger than it had ever been before. Everything seemed to be opening. Everything seemed to be healing. And maybe that was why the quiet question still remained hidden beneath all of it. Was this finally the life they had fought for? Or was fate simply waiting for the moment they felt safest before asking them one more time how much they were willing to endure for love?